Hey, I am Dee, and in this video I'm speaking with Daragh Byrne about how to become a better developer. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure to be here.
Tell about yourself, please.
Yeah, so I work in tech. I have done for quite a long time. My current role is managing consultant at a company called Nomos in Sydney, in Australia. It's essentially a team lead position, so I've got a team of 5 developers. We work with clients on a variety of projects. At the moment, I'm working on a pretty high traffic website for a client in Singapore that gets millions of visitors per month. It's Java backend, it's React on the front end, and it's got GraphQL in the middle. I've worked on a lot of different stacks over the years. I've done a lot of .NET work, I've done PHP. I come from Ireland. I spent a lot of time living in the UK, and I've been in Sydney for the last 10 years, and I love it down here.
Awesome, awesome. Maybe you have an interesting story about how you become a software developer. Can you share it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I kind of fell into being a software developer. I've been programming since I was 10 years old. My dad bought me a computer then, and it was an old ZX Spectrum with rubber keys, and it had a cassette drive. So I'm telling my age this way. And I always programmed, but I decided to study physics in university and took a degree in physics and kept up some coding during the course of that. But when I got to the end of that, I thought about maybe studying to do a PhD, but kind of went to see some laboratories and thought about spending 4 years looking down instruments and thought, no, that's not for me. So I took a course in high performance computing, which is on the intersection of physics and computer science. It's using massively parallel machines, supercomputers, to model physical and real world systems of various types. So I studied that for a master's degree. I went on and I worked in that field for about 5 years. I spent those 5 years in Edinburgh working with scientists, helping them develop software that would run on these machines, or helping them develop software that would manage the data they were producing on these machines. And I got to learn a lot more about writing code regularly during that time, because it was my main job was to build software. Eventually, I decided I wasn't going to be an academic, and it's a career that has its own kind of limitations. And I thought, well, okay, I can write code, so maybe it's time to go out into the real world and become a commercial software developer. And that's what I've been doing kind of ever since.
Yeah, I know that you are practicing meditation. You are just passionate about it. How did you start to meditate and practicing yoga?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love building software. It's a really great career. It brings me a lot of joy and satisfaction, but it can be quite demanding on the mind in particular. And not a lot of people tell you that things like burnout and excessive stress and anxiety can become issues if you don't manage yourself in the correct way. Of course, after 12, maybe 13 years of working as a developer, and having been through a particularly intense kind of startup cycle for about 4 years, I burnt out, and it kind of everything came crashing down. I was lacking in energy, motivation, became quite cynical about software as an industry, and just sort of went, whoa, what's happening here? And I started getting some support, and I started doing some research into what was going on. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about what had happened, why I had become burnt out. I learned a lot about stuff that I could do to restore myself and repair myself. And I learned a lot about what I could do to prevent it in the future as well. And one of the things that I kept on coming back to during that period was this idea of mindfulness and meditation. So there were several people in my life who were telling me that, hey, you know something about meditation already. Maybe it's something that you can practice more regularly, and that will help your recovery, and that will help you prevent burnouts in the future. So I've been interested in it for quite some time before I burnt out, but when that kind of happened, I thought, hey, you know what, this is something I need to pay some serious attention to. And ever since then, in the last kind of 8 or 9 years, it's been a serious part of my kind of self-care practice. It's been something that I lean on when I'm feeling stressed. It's something that I lean on to prevent stress. It's something that I find is very, very valuable in my overall personal productivity as a programmer and in the rest of my life. So it's been a bit of a journey, but it's been very, very enjoyable.
Yeah, yeah, quite a story. Yeah, you said it affects your productivity. There are studies that show how meditations increase also creativity, productivity, emotional intelligence. How meditation helps you to become a better developer?
That's a very good question. So yeah, I think like most people can benefit from meditation in general, but I think there's particular reasons that programmers might become interested in it. You know, the fundamental reason is that programming is a very mind-heavy job. We're using our mind to analyze problems and to create systems that solve those problems. It's all mental activity. And meditation is a discipline that allows you to kind of cultivate a relationship with your mind and to explore how it works and to examine when it's not working amazingly well and to kind of course correct when you discover that's the case. There's 6 main reasons that I always give. I've got an article on my site about this. The first is stress management. Meditation is really good for helping you notice when you're becoming stressed and for also diffusing that stress as it's arising. So most people, when they practice meditation, will find that it relaxes and calms their mind. Over time, the second reason is that meditation can help you reduce your reactivity. So to be reactive is to respond to circumstances very instinctively without thinking about them too much. And it's not always the best response. Meditation tends to calm your nervous system over time so that when you respond to the changes that are happening around you as a developer, you're coming from a kind of calmer place and you're able to consider the situation a little more calmly, and that often leads to better outcomes. The third way it helps me become a better developer is learning how to focus more through distraction management. So just because I meditate doesn't mean I'm never distracted. Actually, I'm still often distracted by all of the things that happen around me and inside of me as I'm going through the tasks of the day as a programmer. What meditation helps me do is kind of notice that I'm distracted and again allow myself to bring myself back to the present moment, to the task at hand. So meditation helps me develop that skill. So I'm generally
Focus. Yeah.
better at focusing on my task as a result of that. The fourth reason that I think it helps me become a better developer, I've developed some emotional intelligence skills as a result of meditation. I'm generally much more aware of my own emotional state, how I'm feeling about certain situations, whether I'm frustrated, angry, happy, and so on. And this allows me to kind of be better in my relationships with people. If I'm frustrated or angry, I can notice it more and I can just acknowledge that, hey, it's probably not the other person's fault that I'm feeling this way. And then I can just change my behavior as a result of this. The fifth reason is self-awareness and self-knowledge. I just know a lot more about how I work, and I can apply that knowledge in a kind of day-to-day sort of when I'm doing things. So, for example, I've learned that I'm very much a procrastinator. I'm sure that's sometimes an issue for yourself and your audience. So meditation has given me some insight into when and where I tend to procrastinate, and like take actions like forcing myself to write the next line of code and so on. The sixth reason is quite an interesting one, and it's kind of this idea of savoring or appreciation. So meditation just doesn't just help me solve all of the problems that I encounter as a developer. It actually helps me enjoy the process a lot more. It helps me enjoy the process of interacting with my teammates, and because I've got this quality of mindfulness of being engaged with my tasks, I can see actually how I'm having fun with them. And what value it's actually bringing into my life. So that's one of the kind of less expected benefits of meditation that people might not always look at. So yeah, that's my six.
Six, right? Sure. Awesome. That's a lot of benefits, I should say. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
You have an article about the flow state. This is the thing that I'm interested as well, especially interested. Can you explain what it is?
Yeah. So I think flow is a state of being, a state of how you feel about the world in the moments, that actually takes a lot of people into programming, because I think it's a state that's available to programmers quite a lot because of the nature of the work. So flow is a state in which we're feeling particularly immersed in the activity that we're doing. We are very present to that activity. We often feel quite focused and involved in the activity itself. And often, there's a bit of an experience of satisfaction or joy. There are kind of conditions to the flow state. They tend to happen when the balance between skill and challenge is exactly right. So we're faced with a problem that we want to solve, for example, but we also have the right amount of skill to solve it. So when these two intersect, that's often when we hit the flow state. So in programming, it's often, those moments when we're just writing code and we feel like it's really just flowing out of us. We're not even too conscious of how we're writing it, but all of a sudden there's code on the screen, it solves the problem. So that's kind of flow. That's, I know when I'm in flow, when I've got that kind of ease, when I'm writing code and it doesn't feel difficult, but it's still correct. And flow can be a tremendously kind of productive state of mind. One of the interesting things about flow is it tends to be activities where you've got both very clear goals on one hand and very clear feedback on the other. And that's, programming to a T. In programming, you know what you want to do. You're like, all right, I've got to write an algorithm that, does this particular thing. And you've also got very distinct feedback, and especially if you're practicing something like test-driven development. Exactly. And you're continuously running your unit tests. And you know whether you're right or wrong. It's kind of like surfing. Your objective is to stay on the wave, and you know if you're on the wave or not, and you're doing it very, very automatically. So that's what flow means to me.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. How often you experience the flow state during a day?
It depends, not as often as I like, but often enough to keep me coming back to programming. There's a reason for that, though. You're not expected to be in the flow state all the time. There's a bigger cycle around flow, the flow cycle, which involves struggle, release, entering flow, and recovery. So sometimes I'm struggling, sometimes I'm in flow, but both of those are expected as part of the flow cycle. When I'm struggling, one of the first things that I do is release. I, step away from the task at hand, and that often gives me the kind of space to enter, to get back into flow as well. I think taking breaks is a very important part of finding flow. So I tend to have flow for, periods of days, and then come out of it and struggle for, a couple of days again.
Mm. How the flow state affects your results?
Yeah, I think there's two main ways. One is my enjoyment. I find being in flow very, very satisfying. And I think that's a common kind of experience. The second way is the results of my coding are generally better. I feel like I get more done during the time I'm in flow. Now, there is a caveat. I do check myself when I come out of flow and I stop and I just examine the work that I've done. I'm careful to make sure that it's as effective and correct as I thought it was. Sometimes you can be in flow and you think you're doing really well, and maybe actually there's some rough edges that you need to clean up. Okay. So I'm always careful to examine the code that I've written when I've been in flow and just say, hey, have I done all the testing right? Have I covered all the edge cases? But in general, I think it contributes positively to my programming output, for sure.
I see. Cool. Remember the best programmers with whom you had the opportunity to work? What skill do they have in common? What makes them the best?
Absolutely. This is a really great question, and it got me thinking. I've worked with a lot of different programmers over the years in lots of different contexts and environments, and the definition of best is a really interesting thing to consider. What is the best programmer? And now you can look at that as like the guy who writes the most code or solves the most problems or has the most productivity, and that's a very, very important part of being best. Right. But for me, there are a category of programmers who they definitely have that. They're productive people, but on top of all of that, in their interactions with me, they've left me feeling like I've learned something, and they've also left me feeling good about that. You know, they're not the types of people who are telling me, "Oh, you should know this." They're actually people who leave me with a good feeling about having learned something. They don't leave me with a bad feeling about the fact that I didn't know something in the first place. They're just happy to share their knowledge, and they're happy that you've kind of learned as well. So I think it's an interpersonal kind of skill rather than a technical skill.
It's like being a good influencer that influence your people around you. Yeah.
Yeah, they want to lift people up.
Absolutely. Leaders.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. 100%. Yeah. Do you have an idea how to get better at these skills that you mentioned?
Yeah. At these particular skills, it's interesting. Like if you're open to the idea of getting better at being a leader, then that already puts you in the category of potentially being a leader. Some people don't see this as something that they want to get better with. So I'm thinking about the really productive guy who's just like thrashing out code and doesn't really care about the rest of his team. Maybe there's not so much of a chance he's going to develop or she's going to develop their skills in this field. But if you're already thinking about it, and if your attitude and your mindset is, okay, well, I've got these people around me, how do I lift them up? How do I share what I know in a free kind of way? How do I have the modesty and vulnerability to say, oh, I don't know that as well? This is also, there's the humility part to it. And having this attitude of sharing, and also having this attitude of, well, okay, these guys might be less senior than I am, but I can still learn from them.
Absolutely.
I think that's probably the way to do it. So being an example is the best way to kind of attempt to transmit that, and then also accepting that some people are just the way they are, and sometimes you have to work around them.
On your avatar, you are staying behind the bookshelf. Actually, it's the bookshelf behind you. Yes.
Right here.
It seems you love reading.
I love reading. When I'm not coding or talking to somebody, I probably have my head, or meditating, I probably have my head in a book. So it's always been like this for me. Yeah. So I like to read a lot of different styles, from classical literature and poetry and sci-fi. I read a lot of sci-fi and some stuff about the brain, the mind, neuroscience, a lot of programming books and so on. So yeah.
What is your favorite book?
This is a great question, and I don't think it's possible to name just like one. But if you come to kind of sci-fi, actually I have it here. Yeah, this book, The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin. It's a brilliant story. It's about physics. It's about politics. It's about philosophy. It's about people. It's a really brilliant book. And in literature, I'm Irish, so I like James Joyce, and he wrote a book called Ulysses, which is one of the best and kind of most difficult books in the English language. So I've been attempting to read that over the last few years as well. It's a really amazing book. Yeah. So maybe I have some Dostoevsky on the shelf as well.
Yeah.
Some of the Russians.
Maybe some favorite technical book.
Favorite technical book. I'm thinking about this actually. So there were a couple of books written by Martin Fowler, who's pretty well-known technical author from ThoughtWorks. His Patterns of Enterprise Application Architecture was a book that stayed with me for a long time. I learned a lot about how to build software at scale from reading that book. I'm trying to think. I guess the classic C programming language, one of the first languages that I ever learned was C. So I think it was Dennis Ritchie who wrote that. So that was a very classical style of book. The one that I'm about to read, that I've been meaning to read for a long time, is Peopleware, which is like more about the human aspect of building software. You know, the interpersonal, soft skill stuff, the stuff that we're interested in.
Cool. Um, this is from your site, codingmindfully.com. I'm on a mission to teach programmers everywhere that their mental capacities can become even more fabulous through attention regulation training, otherwise known as meditation. There is a fabulous machine between our ears, our brain, this hardware for our most important resources as the programmers, your mind. I love that quote. Can you tell more about Coding Mindfully project?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for asking. I think that sums up the core of what I'm trying to do with Coding Mindfully, and it does work from this premise that the mind is super important, but we don't really get taught how to use it in its best ways. I've had to do a lot of learning about mind, from the point of view of, oh wow, hang on a second, this thing isn't really working very well at the moment. How do I fix that? But also from the point of view of like, well, actually, if I learn how to train my mind, I can both be better, at my job, better at programming, better at the mental qualities I need to be a good programmer. And also I can get more out of, my life by learning how to look at it very closely and to appreciate the kind of detail and beauty in my life as well. I find meditation is one of the core things to learn in this regard, because like I say, I call it attention regulation training, and that basically means learning how to regulate what's in your attention. Learning how to focus, learning how to manage distractions. And meditation is very specifically about learning how to train your attention, how your attention wanders, how to bring it back over and over again. And that's a very, very powerful capacity. And from that, a whole heap of other stuff flows out, but that's why I make it core over at Coding Mindfully. So over there, I've got loads of resources on how to do that. I've got a free ultimate guide to meditation for programmers, which is a 36-page ebook. So if you go onto the site, you can read that there, or put your email address in, and I'll send you a PDF download. I'll send you some free guided meditations as well. If you want to take meditation a bit more seriously, I've got a course called The Mindful Developer, and it's a 4-week course in meditation that's specifically aimed at software developers. So I'll teach you the basics of mindfulness-based meditation practices. I'll talk about how they can specifically benefit your life as a developer, how you can work with stress and burnout, how you can deal with things like imposter syndrome, the feeling of not quite being a good enough developer, which I think happens to all of us. And I do that in language that you as a developer will understand. So it's available there. It's a 4-week course. It's $47 US, and I'd love if you try it out. Get in touch, please.
How is your meditation course for programmers different from regular meditation courses?
Yeah, good question. So I cover a lot of the same material as you will cover in a regular meditation course. But I do 2 things differently. One is I talk about specific problems that programmers have, in their day-to-day life, like focusing on code. And I express the concepts in the course in a way that will resonate with programmers. So I talk about, for example, the standard meditation algorithm, which is the basic system that you apply when you're meditating. So it's a question of applying it to the specific problems and using language that you will understand to pass on the concepts. I've had quite a few people participate in the course, and they've all found it really useful. The feedback is great.
Can you share a piece of programming wisdom?
Yes. Yeah, there's a great, there's a lot I could share. So I've been building software for nearly 20 years, and a lot has changed in that time. I grew up in an era where, smartphones weren't there, and now they're everywhere. Biggest piece of advice I can give people is you're never going to know everything, and that's okay. I think we can get into this very kind of unproductive attempt to learn everything there is about software. It's not going to happen. Learning how to learn is more valuable than knowing everything. Yeah. So having the capacity to get to grips with the piece of tech that you're faced with, and understanding the principles behind how software is structured, that's really valuable. But knowing all the facts about every single library that's out there, it's just not possible. So don't try, basically.
Right, right. That was very helpful. Thank you again for joining today's interview. How viewers and listeners can contact you if they will be interested in mindfulness and meditations?
Yeah, absolutely. So get on over to codingmindfully.com, and everything that I do is laid out there. My email is daragh@codingmindfully.com. You can contact me via the site. I'm on Twitter at codingmindfully and Instagram as well. Yeah. So, and I'd love to hear from anybody who wants to learn about this stuff. It's my passion, and I want to share it.
Thank you for watching and listening. This was Daragh Byrne. I am Dee. See you soon.